The morning sun cast long shadows across the Grand Palace gates as Marcus Thompson adjusted his red uniform jacket for the 100th time that day. His black boots gleamed in the sunlight, and his tall black hat sat perfectly straight on his head. Marcus had been standing guard at these same golden gates for 15 long years. Every morning he arrived at exactly 6:30. Every evening he left at exactly 6:30. He never called in sick. He never complained about the long hours standing in one place. He never broke a single rule. Today felt different, though. Marcus could not shake the strange feeling in his chest that something was wrong. The other guards seemed nervous too. They kept whispering to each other and looking around like they expected trouble. Marcus tried to ignore them and focus on his job. His job was simple: stand straight, look alert, protect the palace, make sure no dangerous people got inside. At exactly 10:15 in the morning, Marcus heard the sound of car engines coming down the long road toward the palace. This was not unusual. Many cars came to the palace every day. Important people visited. Delivery trucks brought supplies. Tour buses brought visitors from around the world. But these cars sounded different. They were moving fast, and there were many of them. Marcus turned his head slightly to look down the road. What he saw made his heart start beating faster. 6 police cars were racing toward the palace gates. Their blue lights were flashing and their sirens were wailing. The cars stopped right in front of Marcus with a loud screech of their brakes. Car doors slammed open and police officers jumped out. The lead officer was a tall woman with short brown hair and a serious face. She walked straight up to Marcus and looked him in the eyes. Her voice was loud and clear when she spoke. "Detective Sarah Williams, you are Marcus Thompson, is that correct?" Marcus nodded his head. "Yes, madam, that is my name. How can I help you today?" The detective pulled out a pair of silver handcuffs from her belt. "Marcus Thompson, you are under arrest for the theft of royal artifacts valued at over £3 million. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in court." The words hit Marcus like a punch to the stomach. He could not believe what he was hearing. Theft. Royal artifacts. £3 million. None of it made any sense. Marcus had never stolen anything in his entire life. He had dedicated 15 years of his life to protecting the royal family and everything they owned. The other royal guards who worked with Marcus every day stopped what they were doing and stared. Their mouths hung open in shock. Some of them stepped backward, as if Marcus had suddenly become dangerous. These were men who had shared meals with Marcus. They had talked about their families together. They had worked side by side through rain and snow and blazing summer heat. Detective Williams grabbed Marcus by the arm and started to put the handcuffs on his wrists. The cold metal felt heavy and wrong against his skin. Marcus did not resist. He did not shout or try to run away. He stood perfectly still, just like he had been trained to do as a royal guard. "But sir, there must be some mistake," Marcus said quietly. "I have never stolen anything. I would never betray my oath to protect the crown." The detective did not look like she believed him. She finished putting on the handcuffs and started walking Marcus toward one of the police cars. As they walked, Marcus could see people with cameras running toward them. Newspaper reporters and television news crews had somehow heard about the arrest. They pushed forward, trying to get close enough to take pictures and ask questions. "Marcus Thompson, how do you explain the evidence against you?" One reporter shouted. "Did you really steal from the royal family?" Another voice called out. The camera flashes were so bright that Marcus had to close his eyes. He had never liked being the center of attention. Now the whole world would see him being arrested like a common criminal. His neighbors would see it on the evening news. His wife would see it. His teenage daughter would see it. Detective Williams opened the back door of the police car and put her hand on top of Marcus' head to guide him inside. Before he ducked down into the car, Marcus took one last look at the palace gates where he had spent so many years of his life. The golden metal gleamed in the sunlight. The red brick walls stood strong and proud. Everything looked exactly the same as it always had. But Marcus knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The courtroom was packed with people who had come to watch the trial of Marcus Thompson. Newspaper reporters sat in the front rows with their notebooks ready. Television cameras pointed at the witness stand. In the back of the room, curious citizens whispered to each other about the royal guard who had fallen from grace. Marcus sat at the defendant table wearing a simple gray suit instead of his proud red uniform. His lawyer, David Chen, sat beside him, shuffling through papers and looking worried. David was a good lawyer, but he was young and had never handled a case this big before. The evidence against Marcus seemed to grow stronger every day. Prosecutor Janet Morrison stood up to present her case. She was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and sharp eyes. She had won many important cases and never lost when the evidence was this clear. She walked to the center of the courtroom and looked directly at the jury of 12 ordinary people who would decide Marcus' fate. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Prosecutor Morrison began in a loud, clear voice, "the evidence will show that Marcus Thompson betrayed 15 years of faithful service for money. He stole precious royal artifacts worth over £3 million and thought he would never get caught." The first witness was Detective Williams, who had arrested Marcus at the palace gates. She walked to the witness stand and placed her hand on the Bible to swear she would tell the truth. Her voice was steady and professional as she described the investigation. "We found the defendant fingerprints all over the display case that held the stolen artifacts," Detective Williams explained. "The security cameras show him entering the artifact room at 11:30 on the night of March 15th. He was alone, and he stayed inside for 27 minutes. The prosecutor showed the jury a video on a large television screen. The black and white security footage was grainy, but clear enough to see a figure in a guard uniform walking down a hallway. The person stopped at a door marked private and used a key to go inside. The timestamp on the video showed it was exactly 11:30 at night. Marcus watched the video with growing confusion. The person in the footage looked like him from behind. The uniform was identical to his own, but Marcus knew he had not been in the palace that night. He had been home with his wife Sarah watching television and helping his daughter Emma with her homework. The next witness was Robert Hayes, the head of palace security. He was a stern man with gray hair who had worked at the palace for 30 years. He explained how the theft had been discovered the next morning when staff arrived to clean the artifact room. 3 items were missing, Hayes said while pointing to photographs on an easel: a golden crown worn by Queen Victoria, a diamond necklace from the royal collection, and a silver sword that belonged to King Henry VIII. These artifacts are priceless pieces of British history. Then came the witness that made Marcus' heart sink even further. Bank manager Patricia Collins walked to the witness stand carrying a folder full of documents. She explained that someone had made 3 large deposits into Marcus' bank account in the weeks following the theft. The deposits totaled exactly £3 million, Collins said, the same amount the stolen artifacts were valued at. The money came from an offshore account that we traced to a buyer of stolen goods. Marcus could not believe what he was hearing. He had never seen that money in his bank account. He and his wife Sarah lived paycheck to paycheck. They drove an old car and lived in a small house. If they had £3 million, they would not still be struggling to pay their monthly bills. Sarah sat in the gallery behind Marcus with tears streaming down her face. She had been married to Marcus for 18 years and knew he was not capable of stealing anything. But even she was starting to wonder how someone could plant so much evidence against an innocent man. The most painful moment came when Marcus' former colleagues were called to testify. These were men he had worked beside every day for 15 years. They had shared stories about their families. They had covered for each other when someone was sick. They had celebrated promotions and mourned losses together. One by one, they took the witness stand and testified against him. Guard Captain James Miller spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. Marcus had access to all the keys, Miller said without looking at his former friend. He knew the security schedules. He knew when the cameras would be turned off for maintenance. If anyone could have stolen those artifacts, it would be Marcus Thompson. By the end of the day, the case against Marcus looked impossible to fight. The prosecutor had presented fingerprints, security footage, bank records, and testimony from people who knew him well. Marcus felt like he was drowning in evidence that made no sense to him. As the court adjourned for the day, Marcus was led back to his cell in handcuffs. The concrete walls felt like they were closing in around him. Tomorrow would bring more witnesses and more evidence. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to remember happier times when he wore his uniform with pride. Marcus Thompson had not always dreamed of being a Royal Guard. As a young boy growing up in the rough streets of East London, he had much simpler dreams. He wanted enough food on the table every night. He wanted his mother to stop crying when she thought he was asleep. He wanted his father to come home and stay home. The Thompson family lived in a tiny apartment on the 4th floor of a building that always smelled like garbage and cigarettes. The elevator never worked, so Marcus' mother climbed those stairs every day carrying heavy bags of groceries from her job at the corner market. She worked 3 jobs to keep food on their table and clothes on Marcus' back. Marcus' father left when Marcus was only 7 years old. One morning, Marcus woke up and his father was gone. No goodbye, no explanation. Just an empty closet and a note on the kitchen table that said he needed to find himself. Marcus' mother found the note first and cried for 3 days straight. After that, she never mentioned his father again. School was hard for Marcus because the other kids had things he did not have. They wore new clothes while Marcus wore hand-me-downs from the charity shop. They brought fancy lunches while Marcus ate free school meals. They talked about family vacations while Marcus had never been outside of London. But Marcus was smart, and he worked harder than anyone else in his class. The neighborhood where Marcus grew up was not safe. Drug dealers stood on street corners. Gangs fought over territory. Police sirens wailed every night. But instead of joining the trouble, Marcus chose to help people. He carried groceries for elderly neighbors who could not manage the stairs. He helped younger kids with their homework at the community center. He volunteered at the soup kitchen on weekends, serving meals to homeless people. When Marcus was 16, his mother got very sick. The doctors said it was cancer and she needed expensive treatment. Marcus got a job at the local grocery store stocking shelves after school, and on weekends. Every penny he earned went toward his mother's medical bills. He studied late into the night by the light of a small lamp while his mother slept in the next room. His mother died when Marcus was 18 years old. She passed away quietly in the hospital holding his hand. Her last words were that she was proud of the man he had become. Marcus felt lost and alone, but he remembered what his mother had taught him. Help others. Work hard. Never give up on your dreams. After his mother's funeral, Marcus needed to decide what to do with his life. He could have chosen an easy path. He could have joined one of the gangs that controlled his neighborhood. He could have started selling drugs like some of his childhood friends. But Marcus wanted to honor his mother's memory by doing something good with his life. One day, Marcus saw a poster advertising jobs as Royal Guards. The poster showed men in bright red uniforms standing proudly at palace gates. It said they were looking for people with strong character and dedication to service. Marcus had never thought about working for the royal family, but something about the poster spoke to him. The application process was long and difficult. Marcus had to fill out dozens of forms and answer hundreds of questions about his background. They checked his school records, his work history, and even talked to his neighbors. Many applicants were rejected, but Marcus made it through each round. The training to become a royal guard was the hardest thing Marcus had ever done. He had to wake up at 5 in the morning every day for 6 months. He learned how to march in perfect formation. He practiced standing completely still for hours without moving. He studied the history of the royal family and memorized security procedures. Some of the other trainees came from wealthy families and had attended expensive schools. They looked down on Marcus because of his background and his cheap clothes. But Marcus proved himself through hard work and determination. He scored higher on tests than anyone else. He could stand at attention longer without moving. He never complained even when the training officers screamed at him. On graduation day, Marcus put on the red uniform for the first time. The jacket was heavy, and the tall black hat felt strange on his head. But when he looked in the mirror, he saw something he had never seen before. He saw a man his mother would be proud of. He saw someone who had risen above his circumstances to serve something greater than himself. For 15 years, Marcus wore that uniform with honor. He protected important visitors to the palace. He stood guard during royal ceremonies watched by millions of people around the world. He never forgot where he came from or how hard he had worked to get there. Now sitting in his jail cell, Marcus wondered if it had all been for nothing. The jail cell was nothing like the palace where Marcus had spent 15 years of his life. The walls were painted a dull gray color that made everything look sad and hopeless. A small window near the ceiling let in just enough light to see the metal toilet in the corner and the thin mattress on the metal bed frame. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed and stared at his hands. These were the same hands that had saluted visiting presidents and prime ministers. The same hands that had opened car doors for members of the royal family. The same hands that had carried the flag during important ceremonies. Now these hands were accused of stealing priceless treasures from the very people he had sworn to protect. Every morning a guard brought Marcus his breakfast on a plastic tray. Watery eggs, cold toast, coffee that tasted like dirty water. Marcus ate because he needed to stay strong, but the food had no taste. Everything in his life had lost its flavor since the day of his arrest. The worst part of being in jail was not the bad food or the uncomfortable bed. The worst part was the letters. Every day the mail guard brought Marcus a stack of envelopes. Some were from people who believed he was innocent and wanted to encourage him. But many others were filled with angry words from people who thought he was a traitor and a thief. One letter was from an old woman who wrote in shaky handwriting. She said she had always respected the royal guards and felt personally betrayed by what Marcus had done. Another letter came from a young boy who said he used to want to be a royal guard when he grew up, but now he thought all guards were criminals. The letters that hurt the most were the ones about his family. Someone had written to tell Marcus that his wife Sarah was being followed by reporters everywhere she went. They shouted questions at her when she left for work in the morning. They took pictures of her buying groceries. They even waited outside his daughter Emma's school trying to get her to talk about her father. Sarah had to take time off from her job at the bank because customers were staring at her and whispering behind her back. Some people crossed the street when they saw her coming. Others pointed and made rude comments. The woman who had always been proud to be married to a royal guard now felt ashamed to leave her house. Emma was having an even harder time. She was only 16 years old and did not understand how her father could be accused of such terrible things. At school, other students called her names and said her family were criminals. Her best friends stopped talking to her. Teachers looked at her with pity in their eyes. Emma stopped eating lunch in the cafeteria because she could not stand the way everyone stared at her. Marcus received one letter from Emma that made him cry for the first time since his arrest. She wrote in her careful handwriting that she still believed he was innocent, but she wished he had never become a royal guard. She said maybe if he had chosen a different job, none of this would have happened to their family. At night, Marcus lay on his thin mattress and thought about all the years he had served at the palace. He remembered the day he first put on his red uniform and felt so proud. He remembered standing in the rain for hours during a royal wedding while thousands of people cheered. He remembered the Christmas morning when the Queen herself had walked past his post and nodded to him with a small smile. Had it all been worth it? Marcus wondered as he stared at the ceiling. He had given up other job opportunities to stay loyal to the crown. He had missed family dinners and school plays because he was working. He had stood in the hot sun and cold snow without complaining because he believed in the importance of his duty. Now all those years of service meant nothing. People saw him as a criminal who had betrayed everything good and honorable about his position. The uniform he had worn with such pride was locked away in an evidence room somewhere. The colleagues who had once respected him now testified against him in court. The courthouse was buzzing with activity on the morning Marcus' trial was set to begin. Reporters from every major newspaper and television station in Britain had gathered outside the building. Camera crews set up their equipment while journalists practiced their opening lines for the evening news. This was the biggest story of the year, and everyone wanted to be there when the royal guard finally faced justice. Inside the courtroom, every seat was filled. The judge bench stood empty, waiting for the arrival of Judge William Hartford. Hartford was known throughout the legal system as a fair but tough judge who never let emotions get in the way of the law. He had been a judge for 20 years and had handled some of the most important cases in British history. Marcus sat at the defendant table wearing the same gray suit he had worn every day of the trial. His lawyer, David Chen, sat beside him looking through his notes one last time. Chen was nervous because he knew the evidence against his client was very strong. But he also believed Marcus was telling the truth about being innocent. Sarah Thompson sat in the front row of the gallery directly behind her husband. She had lost weight during the weeks of the trial, and her face looked tired and worried. Every day she came to court hoping to hear something that would prove Marcus' innocence. So far, that hope had been disappointed. At exactly 9 o'clock, Judge Hartford entered the courtroom. He was a tall man in his early 60s with gray hair and sharp blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His black robes made him look serious and important. As he took his seat at the judge bench, the bailiff called for everyone to stand and then to be seated. Judge Hartford looked around the packed courtroom and spoke in a clear, strong voice. "This court is now in session. We are here today to continue the trial of Marcus Thompson, who stands accused of theft of royal property. Prosecutor Morrison, you may continue with your case." Prosecutor Morrison stood up and straightened her jacket. She had been preparing for this moment for weeks and was confident she could prove Marcus' guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. The evidence was overwhelming, and she had witnesses who would testify to Marcus' opportunity and motive. "Your Honor, the prosecution calls Detective Inspector Robert Hayes to the witness stand," Morrison announced. Hayes was the lead detective who had investigated the theft. He was a serious man with 30 years of experience in police work. He walked to the witness stand and was sworn in by the court clerk. His testimony would be crucial in explaining how the investigation had led to Marcus' arrest. "Detective Hayes, please tell the court how you first learned about the theft of the royal artifacts," Morrison asked. Hayes cleared his throat and spoke directly to the jury. "On the morning of March 16th, Palace Security contacted Scotland Yard to report that 3 valuable artifacts were missing from the royal collection. We immediately secured the scene and began our investigation." The detective explained how the investigation had unfolded step by step. First, they had examined the security footage, which clearly showed someone in a Royal Guard uniform entering the restricted area. Then they had checked the fingerprints on the display case, which matched those of Marcus Thompson. Finally, they had traced the money that appeared in Marcus' bank account. Morrison showed the jury photographs of the crime scene and charts that illustrated the timeline of events. Everything pointed to Marcus as the only person who could have committed the theft. The prosecutor was building a case that seemed impossible to defend against. When it was David Chen turned to cross-examine the detective, he stood up slowly. Chen knew he had to find some weakness in the prosecution case, but the evidence seemed airtight. He decided to focus on the details and see if he could find any inconsistencies. "Detective Hayes, you testified that the security footage shows someone in a guard uniform entering the restricted area. But can you positively identify that person as my client, Marcus Thompson?" Hayes hesitated for a moment. "The footage is not completely clear because it was taken from some distance, but the person in the video matches Mr. Thompson's height and build, and we know he had access to that area of the palace." Chen pressed further. "But you cannot see the person face in the video, can you, Detective Hayes?" "No, the person back is turned to the camera. But combined with the other evidence, we believe it was Mr. Thompson." This small admission gave Chen hope. If the prosecution could not positively identify Marcus in the security footage, then maybe their case was not as strong as it appeared. He made a note to investigate this further. The next witness was the palace curator who had discovered the missing artifacts. She testified about the value of the stolen items and the security measures that were supposed to protect them. Her testimony painted Marcus as someone who had violated a sacred trust. As the morning wore on, more witnesses took the stand. Each one added another piece to the puzzle that seemed to prove Marcus' guilt. The bank manager testified about the mysterious deposits. The security chief explained how only someone with inside knowledge could have pulled off the theft. Marcus listened to each witness with growing despair. How could so much evidence point to him when he knew he was innocent? Someone had gone to great lengths to make him look guilty, but he had no idea who or why. During the lunch break, Chen tried to reassure his client. "We knew this would be difficult, Marcus. But our turn is coming. When you take the stand and tell your story, the jury will see that you are telling the truth." Marcus nodded, but he was not sure anyone would believe him. The evidence against him was so overwhelming that even he was starting to wonder if he could prove his innocence. All he could do was tell the truth and hope that somehow justice would prevail. When court resumed after lunch, David Chen stood up to call his first witness. The courtroom was quiet as everyone waited to hear the defense case. Chen had decided that his best chance was to put Marcus on the witness stand and let him tell his own story. If the jury could see Marcus' character and hear his version of events, maybe they would have reasonable doubt about his guilt. "Marcus Thompson, please take the witness stand," Chen announced. Marcus stood up slowly and walked across the courtroom. Every eye was on him as he placed his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. His voice was steady, but inside his heart was racing. This was his chance to prove his innocence. Chen began with easy questions about Marcus' background and his years of service as a royal guard. Marcus spoke about his dedication to his job and his pride in serving the crown. He explained how he had never been in trouble with the law and had always followed every rule and regulation. Then Chen moved to the night of the theft. "Marcus, where were you on the evening of March 15th, between the hours of 10 and midnight?" Marcus looked directly at the jury as he answered, "I was at home with my wife Sarah and my daughter Emma. We had dinner together around 7 o'clock. Then Emma asked me to help her with her mathematics homework. After that, Sarah and I watched a television program about nature documentaries. I went to bed around 11:30. The prosecutor had claimed that security footage showed Marcus at the palace at 11:30 that night, but Marcus insisted he was at home sleeping next to his wife. Someone was lying, but who? Chen continued his questioning. "Marcus, have you ever stolen anything in your entire life?" "No, sir, I have not. My mother raised me to be honest and hardworking. Stealing goes against everything I believe in." Then Marcus began to tell a story that surprised everyone in the courtroom. He spoke about something that had happened 23 years earlier when he was just 19 years old. It was a story he had never told anyone except his wife. A story about a night that had changed his life forever. "I was walking home from my job at the grocery store," Marcus said quietly. "It was late, probably around 10 o'clock at night. I was tired and just wanted to get home to help my mother with her medical bills. As I walked down Baker Street, I heard shouting coming from an alley." Marcus paused and took a deep breath before continuing. "When I looked into the alley, I saw 3 men attacking a young man. They had him cornered against a brick wall and were demanding his wallet and his watch. The young man looked terrified. He was well dressed like he came from money, but that did not matter to me. Someone was in trouble and needed help." The courtroom was completely silent as Marcus continued his story. "Without thinking about my own safety, I ran into the alley and confronted the 3 attackers. I was not very big, and I was not trained in fighting, but I could not just walk away while someone was being hurt." Marcus described the fight that followed. The 3 men turned on him and beat him badly. He suffered a broken nose and several bruised ribs. But he managed to fight them off long enough for the young man to escape. The attackers eventually ran away when they heard police sirens in the distance. "The young man I saved was very grateful," Marcus continued. "He thanked me over and over again. He said I had probably saved his life. He wanted to give me money as a reward, but I refused. I told him I had only done what anyone should do when they see someone in trouble." Marcus looked around the courtroom as he finished his story. The young man asked for my name and address so he could send me a thank you letter. But I was embarrassed about where I lived and did not want his pity. I just told him my name was Marcus Thompson and walked away. I never saw him again and never expected to. David Chin nodded and continued his questioning. Marcus, why are you telling us this story? What does it have to do with the charges against you? Marcus answered with conviction in his voice. Because that night 23 years ago shows who I really am. I am someone who helps people even when it costs me something. I am someone who does the right thing even when no one is watching. I would never steal from the royal family because that would go against everything I believe in. The prosecutor objected that this story had nothing to do with the current case, but Judge Hartford allowed Marcus to continue. The judge seemed interested in hearing more about this incident from long ago. Marcus went on to explain how that night had inspired him to become a royal guard. He wanted to spend his life protecting people and serving something greater than himself. He had carried the memory of that night with him through 15 years of faithful service. As Marcus finished his testimony about the past, he looked around the courtroom one more time. He did not notice that Judge Hartford had gone very still in his chair. He did not see that the judge's hands were trembling slightly as he gripped his gavel. Judge Hartford was remembering something too. He was remembering a night 23 years ago when he was a young law student walking home from the library. He was remembering 3 men who cornered him in an alley and demanded his money. He was remembering a stranger who appeared out of nowhere to save his life. The judge was remembering the name the stranger had given him before disappearing into the night. Marcus Thompson. But Judge Hartford said nothing. He sat quietly in his chair as the testimony continued. His mind was racing as he tried to process what he had just heard. Could this be the same Marcus Thompson who had saved his life all those years ago? Could the man on trial be the hero who had changed the course of his entire future? The courtroom had no idea that something extraordinary was happening. They did not know that the judge was having the shock of his life. They just saw Marcus Thompson finishing his testimony about a night that had happened long ago, when he was young and brave and willing to risk everything to help a stranger. Judge William Hartford sat frozen in his chair as Marcus finished telling his story about that night 23 years ago. The judge's face had gone completely pale, and his hands were shaking so badly he had to put them under his desk to hide them from the courtroom. His heart was pounding so hard he was afraid everyone could hear it. The memories came flooding back like a dam had burst in his mind. He was 26 years old again, walking home from the law library at Oxford University. He had been studying for his final exams that would determine his future as a lawyer. The streets were dark and empty because it was past 10 o'clock at night. Hartford remembered every detail of that terrible night. He had taken a shortcut through the narrow streets near campus when 3 men stepped out of the shadows. They were bigger than him and looked dangerous. One of them had a knife that gleamed in the streetlight. They demanded his wallet, his watch, and his school ring. He had been terrified and certain he was going to die. His whole future flashed before his eyes. All those years of studying to become a lawyer. All his dreams of helping people and making a difference in the world. Everything was about to end because of 3 criminals who wanted a few pounds and a cheap watch. Then suddenly a stranger appeared out of nowhere. A young man about his own age who looked like he worked with his hands for a living. The stranger did not hesitate for even a second. He threw himself at the 3 attackers and started fighting them even though he was outnumbered. Hartford watched as Marcus continued his testimony, but the judge's mind was stuck in the past. He remembered how the brave stranger had taken a terrible beating, but kept fighting until the attackers gave up and ran away. The stranger had probably saved his life that night. After the attackers fled, Hartford had tried to thank his rescuer properly. He wanted to take him to a hospital because he was bleeding from his nose and mouth. He wanted to give him money or at least buy him dinner. But the young man had refused everything. The stranger had seemed embarrassed when Hartford asked for his name and address. He had mumbled something about just doing what anyone would do. Finally, he had said his name was Marcus Thompson, and then walked away into the darkness. Hartford never saw him again despite trying to find him for weeks afterward. Now 23 years later, that same Marcus Thompson was sitting in his courtroom accused of being a thief and a criminal. The man who had risked his life to save a stranger was being painted as someone who would betray his oath for money. Hartford knew with absolute certainty that this was impossible. The judge tried to focus on the current testimony, but his mind kept drifting back to that night. If Marcus Thompson had not intervened, Hartford probably would have been robbed and possibly killed. He never would have finished law school. He never would have become a lawyer or a judge. His entire career and everything he had accomplished was only possible because of Marcus' courage. Hartford thought about his wife Margaret and their 2 children. He thought about all the cases he had handled over the years and all the times he had been able to help deliver justice. None of it would have happened if Marcus had not been willing to help a stranger in trouble. Defense lawyer David Chen was still questioning Marcus about his character and his years of faithful service. Marcus spoke about his dedication to protecting the royal family and his pride in wearing the uniform. His voice was steady and sincere as he denied having anything to do with the theft. Prosecutor Morrison stood up to cross-examine Marcus. She tried to poke holes in his story and make him look like a liar. She asked him why there was no record of the incident he described. She pointed out that he had no witnesses to prove where he was on the night of the theft. But Judge Hartford was barely listening to the legal arguments. He was studying Marcus' face and trying to see the 19-year-old boy who had saved his life. The years had changed them both, but Hartford was certain this was the same person. The same honest eyes, the same quiet strength, the same willingness to do what was right even when it was difficult. As the afternoon wore on, Hartford found himself unable to concentrate on anything except the incredible coincidence that had brought them together again. What were the chances that the man who had saved his life would end up on trial in his courtroom? What were the chances that he would be in a position to return the favor? But Hartford was also troubled by what he was hearing. The evidence against Marcus seemed overwhelming. Fingerprints, security footage, bank records, witness testimony. How could an innocent man be surrounded by so much incriminating evidence? Someone had to be lying, but who and why? When court adjourned for the day, Hartford remained in his chair long after everyone else had left. He sat alone in the empty courtroom thinking about justice and coincidence, and the strange ways that life connects people across time and distance. He thought about calling for a recess so he could investigate further. He thought about revealing his connection to the defendant. But he also knew that judges were supposed to be impartial. His personal feelings could not be allowed to interfere with the legal process. That night, Hartford went home to his comfortable house and tried to eat dinner with his family. But he could not stop thinking about Marcus Thompson sitting in a jail cell accused of crimes Hartford knew he could never have committed. The man who had once saved his life was now counting on him to deliver justice. Hartford barely slept that night. He kept thinking about what he should do with the knowledge he now possessed. By morning, he had made a decision that would change everything. Judge Hartford arrived at the courthouse early the next morning with a heavy heart and a clear purpose. He had spent the entire night thinking about what he should do with the knowledge that Marcus Thompson was the man who had saved his life 23 years ago. As much as he wanted to help Marcus, he knew he had to follow the law and ensure that justice was served properly. Before court began, Hartford called both lawyers into his private chambers. David Chen and Prosecutor Morrison sat across from his desk, wondering why the judge wanted to see them. Hartford took a deep breath and made a decision that surprised them both. "I am ordering a complete re-examination of all evidence in this case," Hartford announced. "I want every piece of physical evidence tested again by independent experts. I want every witness statement verified. I want the security footage analyzed by the best technology available." Prosecutor Morrison was shocked. "Your Honor, the evidence has already been thoroughly examined. We have followed all proper procedures. There is no reason to doubt our findings." Hartford looked at her with stern eyes. "Prosecutor Morrison, this court has a duty to ensure that justice is served correctly. If there is even the smallest possibility that evidence has been overlooked or misinterpreted, then we must investigate further. I am ordering a 3-day recess while this new investigation takes place." Chen was confused but hopeful. He did not understand why the judge was suddenly taking this unusual step, but he was grateful for any chance to find new evidence that might help his client. Something had changed in the judge's attitude overnight, but Chen could not figure out what it was. During the recess, Hartford personally contacted the head of Scotland Yard's forensic department. He requested that their best investigators take a fresh look at every aspect of the case. He also ordered that the security footage be examined by computer experts who specialized in detecting digital manipulation. What they found shocked everyone involved in the case. The computer analysis revealed that the security footage had been cleverly altered. Someone with advanced technical skills had digitally inserted Marcus' face and uniform into video that actually showed a different person. The original footage showed someone slightly shorter than Marcus with different body language and movement patterns. The fingerprint evidence also came under new scrutiny. Forensic experts discovered that while Marcus' fingerprints were indeed on the display case, they had been placed there weeks before the theft occurred. The pattern showed that Marcus had touched the case during a routine security inspection that was part of his normal duties. Most importantly, the investigation into the bank deposits revealed their true source. The money had not come from selling stolen artifacts as the prosecution claimed. Instead, it had been transferred from an account belonging to Nicholas Webb, a former Palace employee who had been fired 6 months earlier for suspicious behavior. Webb had worked in the Palace's computer systems department and had access to security cameras and personnel files. After being fired, he had planned an elaborate scheme to steal the artifacts and frame Marcus for the crime. He chose Marcus because he knew that a respected royal guard would make the perfect scapegoat. The investigation revealed that Webb had spent months planning his revenge. He had studied Marcus' schedule and habits. He had learned how to manipulate the security system. He had even practiced imitating Marcus' walk and posture so he could create convincing fake footage. On the night of the theft, Webb had used his knowledge of the palace layout to enter through an old service tunnel that was not covered by cameras. He stole the 3 artifacts and then carefully planted evidence to make Marcus look guilty. The fake bank deposits were designed to provide a motive for the crime. When Webb was arrested at his apartment, police found the 3 stolen artifacts hidden in a secret compartment behind his bedroom wall. They also found detailed plans showing how he had orchestrated the frame-up, including computer programs he had used to alter the security footage. Webb confessed everything when confronted with the evidence. He admitted that he had chosen Marcus specifically because he was jealous of the respect and honor that Marcus had earned through years of faithful service. Webb had been fired for trying to steal palace computer equipment, but Marcus had always been seen as a model employee. The confession revealed the depths of Webb's hatred and resentment. He had blamed Marcus and other guards for his own failures and had wanted to destroy the reputation of someone he saw as representing everything he could never be. His plan had almost worked perfectly. When court reconvened 3 days later, the atmosphere was completely different. Prosecutor Morrison stood up with a heavy heart to address the judge and jury. She had built her career on seeking justice, but now she had to admit that justice had almost been perverted by an elaborate lie. "Your Honor and members of the jury," Morrison began with obvious difficulty, "new evidence has come to light that completely changes this case. We have discovered that Marcus Thompson is innocent of all charges. The real thief was Nicholas Webb, who went to extraordinary lengths to frame Mr. Thompson for crimes he did not commit." The courtroom erupted in gasps and shouts of surprise. Reporters frantically took notes while Sarah Thompson burst into tears of relief. Marcus sat stunned, hardly able to believe what he was hearing after weeks of being painted as a criminal and traitor. Morrison continued her painful admission. "The prosecution withdraws all charges against Marcus Thompson and formally apologizes for the suffering this case has caused him and his family. We will be filing new charges against Nicholas Webb, who has confessed to the theft and to framing an innocent man." Judge Hartford sat quietly listening to the prosecutor admission. He felt a mixture of relief that the truth had finally come out and anger that an innocent man had been put through such an ordeal. He also felt grateful that he had trusted his instincts and ordered the new investigation. When Morrison finished speaking, Hartford stood up from his bench. This was highly unusual because judges typically remained seated while court was in session. But Hartford felt that this moment called for something more than ordinary judicial procedure. The entire courtroom watched in silence as Judge Hartford remained standing. His gesture was a mark of profound respect for a man who had been wrongly accused and who had maintained his dignity throughout the ordeal. The judge stood there for a full minute saying nothing but honoring Marcus Thompson with his silence. Then slowly everyone else in the courtroom began to stand as well. The jury members rose from their seats. The lawyers stood up. The reporters and spectators got to their feet. Even the court officers and bailiffs stood at attention. The entire room was paying tribute to a man whose character had finally been vindicated. The silence in the courtroom lasted for what felt like an eternity. Judge Hartford remained standing behind his bench, looking directly at Marcus Thompson, with eyes that held both respect and something deeper that no one else in the room could understand. Finally, the judge spoke in a voice that carried the weight of 23 years of gratitude. Marcus Thompson, all charges against you are hereby dismissed with prejudice. You are free to go with the sincere apologies of this court and the entire justice system. The record will reflect that you have been completely exonerated and that you were the victim of an elaborate criminal conspiracy. Hartford brought down his gavel with a firm strike that echoed through the silent courtroom. The sound seemed to break a spell, and suddenly the room erupted in applause and cheers. Reporters rushed toward their phones to call in the breaking news. Sarah Thompson pushed through the crowd to reach her husband while tears of joy streamed down her face. Marcus sat for a moment unable to move or speak. After weeks of being painted as a criminal and traitor, he was suddenly free. The nightmare that had consumed his life was finally over. He felt Sarah's arms around him and heard her sobbing with relief against his shoulder. David Chen grabbed Marcus' hand and shook it vigorously. "I never doubted your innocence, Marcus. Justice has finally been served." The young lawyer was overjoyed that his first major case had ended with his client being completely vindicated. Outside the courthouse, hundreds of people had gathered to hear the verdict. When news spread that Marcus had been cleared of all charges and that the real thief had been caught, the crowd began cheering and applauding. Many of these were ordinary citizens who had followed the case and had come to believe in Marcus' innocence. The royal palace issued an official statement within hours of the verdict. Her Majesty the Queen expresses her complete confidence in Marcus Thompson and her gratitude for his 15 years of faithful service. Mr. Thompson will be welcomed back to his position with full honors, and his record will show no mention of these false charges. Nicholas Webb was arrested and charged with theft, grand larceny, computer fraud, and conspiracy to frame an innocent person. He would eventually be sentenced to 12 years in prison for his crimes. During his sentencing hearing, he showed no remorse for what he had done to Marcus and his family. The media coverage of Marcus' exoneration was massive. Every newspaper and television station covered the story of the loyal royal guard who had been wrongly accused and then dramatically cleared. Many of the same reporters who had painted him as a traitor now praised him as a hero who had maintained his dignity under impossible circumstances. Emma Thompson returned to school with her head held high. Her classmates who had once teased her about her father now treated her with new respect. Her teachers apologized for doubting her family. The girl who had been ashamed of her last name was now proud to be a Thompson. 3 days after his exoneration, Marcus put on his red Royal Guard uniform for the first time in months. The jacket felt heavier than he remembered, and the tall black hat seemed strange on his head after so long. But as he walked through the palace gates to return to his post, he felt a sense of pride and purpose that had been missing from his life. His fellow guards who had testified against him during the trial now approached him with shame and apologies. Captain Miller was the first to speak. "Marcus, I am sorry we doubted you. We should have known that someone of your character could never have done what you were accused of." Marcus accepted their apologies with grace and understanding. He knew they had only been doing their duty by telling the truth as they understood it. He held no grudges against men who had been deceived by the same lies that had fooled everyone else. Judge Hartford never told anyone about his personal connection to Marcus Thompson. He felt that revealing the story might diminish the importance of the legal process that had ultimately led to the truth. But he did write a private letter to Marcus that he kept locked in his desk drawer for months before finally deciding to send it. The letter was simple and direct. It said that sometimes justice takes time, but it always finds a way to prevail when good people refuse to give up hope. Hartford signed it simply as a grateful citizen who believes in the importance of character and honor. Marcus never understood the full meaning of that letter, but he kept it as a reminder that there were still people in the world who believed in doing the right thing. He framed it and hung it next to his family photographs in the small guardhouse where he spent his breaks. On the anniversary of his exoneration, Marcus stood at his familiar post outside the palace gates. The morning sun cast the same long shadows it had cast for 15 years. Tourists took pictures and children waved at him through the iron bars. Everything looked exactly the same as it always had. But Marcus knew that he was different now. He had been tested in ways he never could have imagined and had discovered strength he did not know he possessed. He had learned that truth and justice sometimes take time to emerge, but they are worth waiting for and fighting for. As he adjusted his red jacket and straightened his tall black hat, Marcus thought about his mother and the lessons she had taught him about helping others and never giving up on what was right. He thought about the night 23 years ago when he had helped a stranger in trouble. He thought about how one act of courage had somehow led to his own salvation. Marcus Thompson stood proud at his post, knowing that he had weathered the worst storm of his life and emerged with his honor intact. The royal guard who had been put on trial had been proven innocent by the truth, and sometimes that is the only justice that really matters.